I'm going to be getting out of the way because, to be perfectly honest, these three gentlemen need no introduction. But since form demands one, I will be as brief as possible. GE obviously is going to be our master of ceremonies tonight, asking the questions and taking part in the conversation. It was my enormous good fortune and privilege to work with GE on the curation of the exhibition upstairs. So if you haven't seen it, GE has very kindly lent us a number of his guitars, and we've borrowed two others from other collections. It's a personal and extraordinary interesting look at the instrument, and it is open Wednesday until Sunday 12 to 5 until the 15th of December. So if you have time, please do come back from that. We are also incredibly lucky tonight to have Matt Umanov, who since 1965 has bought, sold, repaired, looked after, studied, and known guitars. Obviously, his shop was legendary, and we are incredibly lucky to have him. So thank you so much. And rounding out our guest tonight is John Monteleone, who, after being taught woodworking by his father, is a self-taught luthier who is known internationally for the innovations, both acoustic as well as aesthetic, in his guitars. And so, John, thank you so much for being here. That's all from me. Again, thank you to you, and thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you, Sarah. And a special thanks to Sarah. She has taken care of all the guitars here for the past couple months with the humidity, because it's a big factor with acoustic instruments. They need to live in a certain humidity, and she has been really on it, and I really appreciate it. And thank you to Eric Fischel, April Gornick, Sherry, thank you. Everybody here at the church has just been great, and I've had a really good time doing this little exhibition, and I love guitars, so it's great to be here. So Matt and John, I'm honored to be here with these guys. The amount of knowledge about guitars that's sitting up here is just ridiculous, okay? These two guys, they know. So I'm gonna start out by asking them both a question, and my personal theory is that if you go way back, there's a guy in Africa, and he's cleaning some animal, and something twangs. And he goes, this is a couple thousands of years ago. That's a cool sound. And he twang, and he takes that piece of gut, and he twanging it, and his friends, listen to this. Twang. Okay, a couple hundred years go by, and somebody says, what if we stretch that across the top of a hollow gourd? Twang. Now it's got bass. Twang. A couple more hundred years go by. Another person comes along and says, if you put a stick in the side of that hollow gourd, we could make it longer. How's that? Boom, boom. Now he's got a big bass note. Anyway, you can see what I'm talking about. Now, at the same time that's going on in Africa, I believe it was going on in what is now China, too. And they came up with a different instruments, but stringed instruments that you press down with your fingers, and they have frets, everything. So, boom, boom. So, John, I'll go to you first. It gets to Europe. What happens? Where does it start in Europe?
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for being here. This is really wonderful to see so many people with an enthusiasm and an interest in these instruments and the history of it. There is a lot of history. There's a lot of evolution. There's a lot of invention and exploration. And I think if we go back to these primitive ideas, the most basic fundamental idea is the human voice. I think it really starts with the human voice and communication. And communication, not only with the voice, but being able to, I think one of the earliest instruments was a drum, or beating on something, some kind of a rhythm, which would be connected to a kind of conversation. And most conversations, I think, in those days related to survival. And keeping your domain was of vital importance. And I think along the way, the human soul, the human interest, the human aspect was right there from the beginning, in connection with people, with other people, for various reasons. It could be for self-defense, it could be for love, it could be for all these different emotions, and the human being is capable of an incredible amount of human emotion. Being able to pluck a string, a simple idea, the most simple idea, plucking a string and having a resonance come from it, you have an immediate response. This is what we find right now with any musical instrument that we come in contact with, and that the human input has a response. The guitar is one of the most beautiful things, like other primitive instruments that came well before it historically. They all had the same, I think, emotion, or the same thought in mind, was this immediate response that spoke to them. And then from that point forward, I think it opened the door to possibilities that I think creative minds would come into play. Perhaps by accident, could be by accident. Somebody beat on a log or something and it had this sound to it. And, oh, that's interesting. So it's a matter of discovery is a good part of it. And then the human curiosity comes into play, and the mind as to what can we do with this? What can I do with this? And then it becomes not only a personal endeavor, but it becomes a communal spirit. And that's what I think is at the very root of this historical story that continues to our day for various ways and so forth.
Do you think that the earliest European guitars were Italy?
Were what?
Italian made? The earliest guitars in
the
in
guitar.
Europe.
Well, the guitar took many forms to begin with. European, for sure. I think most countries may have extracted certain relevant ideas, let's say from the lute.
Which I think came from the oud, right?
The oud, yes. The oud was one of the early instruments that is still being played today. It's very ancient. What this is, it speaks to culture. The different cultures, the European cultures were so many, and that came to America and brought with them a lot of these ideas. So was it Italy? Okay, Italy had a certain amount of invention for the guitar coming through the Baroque era, and that was probably the most sophisticated forward movement of the guitar for what was going to happen to it, becoming a double-course instrument in various forms and formations, eventually leading to a six-string idea that we enjoy today, is most common. But the battente guitar was, there are a lot of folk-style instruments that were in probably every country. They had them. And I think a lot of cultures today still, to maintain their culture, not only through the instruments, but through the cuisine, all the different types of enjoyments of their life. Music is certainly a part of them, but everyday living is a part of that as well. So they keep that ceremony of life alive.
So obviously, as Europeans started coming over here, some of them brought guitars with them from Europe, because by the time, well, there's an Italian guitar upstairs there from about 1810, and by then guitars had 6 strings. For a while they had 3, and as John said, some of them had double courses, in other words, the same string twice. give it more volume, you know. But by about 1800, they got 6 strings. And then, in 1833, who shows up? Take it, Matt.
C.F. Martin shows up from Martineukirchen, Germany, or it wasn't Germany yet. Germany wasn't consolidated as Germany till the 1870s, but he was from a town, and this is a known story, where there were guilds, which were associations of furniture makers mostly, and there were some instrument makers, guitar makers, and the guys in the guild said, "You guys are lowlifes. We don't want you. Just go away." And so he went away, and came first to New York in 1833, stuck around for 6 years, and eventually went down to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, where a lot of his countrymen already were. It is still quite... you look in the phone book in Lehigh County there, you see a lot of German names. And he started something that just wouldn't stop. He was able to figure out, it took him about, 25 years or so, to finally come up with the structural design, the interior design, which they still do today. And every time I hear people say, "Oh, the new ones aren't as good as the old ones," I say, "Stop, you haven't taken them apart. It's the same dang thing from 1859, maybe with a couple of little improvements here and there, but this guy figured out something structurally that worked. And all of the Martin guitars were, up until the 1930s, made for gut strings, the modern equivalent being nylon. Other people were making metal string guitars. They were a bit conservative, those people, still are. But they finally got into it and strengthened them up. And today, you look at a steel string guitar, there is hardly a steel string flat top guitar on the planet that is not minimally a 95% copy of the designs Martin worked out in the 1850s. And they're still going strong. Other people have come along. The Gibson Company came along, basically copying Martin's, but it's interesting. It was years before it finally occurred to me why they sound so different than Martin's, like 1930s, 40s, 50s Gibsons. They're, to put it bluntly, they're more sloppily built. If you take one apart, it's a Martin design. It's basically a copy of a Martin, but the parts don't meet quite as neatly, etc. They're looser instruments. They've got their own sound. They're wonderful. So that's what came. It went with American music, and became part of it, and just intertwined. It's the steel string guitar and American music, as it has come up in the last, I guess, 200 years or so, inexorably intertwined. And we're so happy to have it. What struck me at one point in all the years that I was fooling around with this stuff and running that clubhouse that I had, when people would talk about, this feature and that feature, and I need to own one that has the left screw on the right and whatever. Stop. These things are for making music. Making music is what they're about, and making music is a good thing for all of us, no matter what kind of music, no matter if it's appealing or perhaps not so appealing. It's good for the soul. It's good for your body. It's good for everything about you. So you have a guitar at home, you haven't picked it up for a while, or a banjo, or a saxophone for that matter. Pick it up. Make a little music. This is what it's all about.
It's really true. I've been lucky enough, because I was a guitar player, that I got to travel a lot around a good part of the world. And wherever I went, I could play the same way, and people understood it. You know, there's no language when it comes to music. It's just music. And like both John and Matt have said, it's from the soul, you know, and it connects people. And that's a beautiful thing. you notice Matt said that Martin kept making gut string guitars up until the end of the 20s, 30s.
1934.
1934, they were still making gut. 1934 was completely steel strings. So, and also the guitars started getting bigger. Once you got into the 20th century, people said, which I think they were going for volume, right?
Yeah, but
Is that
but
why they
also-
got bigger?
Yeah, well, the story from with the development of the Martin Dreadnought, that giant thing that we all know, which starts out in 1917, is that for mandolin orchestras, they needed something to carry the bottom end of the band, and guitars weren't big enough, and so Martin came out with a bigger one. That would be louder and have more bass, because when you get a larger instrument, the bass responses are going to be more. Trebles, maybe not so much, but then there's the other theory of, as we all know, in America, if it's bigger, it must be better. This is why Chevrolets grew to 23 feet in the 1960s, et cetera, et cetera. And so even though it wasn't for so much for bands or orchestras, when really the folk boom hit and all this, and people really started going nuts buying guitars in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, everybody bought the big ones. Oh, it's bigger, it must be better. It's a subconscious thing. This comes from the sales side of me, having run a store for all those years. And you know, when you're in retail, you got to figure out, how are you going to get this stuff sold? And basically, you become a psychologist in a way. What are they thinking? And oh, the bigger ones. Oh, yeah, I want the bigger one. I'll take the bigger one. But you know, you ask for something sweet and all this. The smaller ones have the sweeter sound. I'll take the bigger one. Okay. It's okay. They did a wonderful thing, and if you look around at just the vast majority of all steel string guitars made in the world today by anybody, guess what? It's a copy of that Martin Dreadnought. We'll thank them for it. It's good.
Yeah, it really is. So,
And can I add one thing here?
Yeah, go.
I just got to say, I am so honored to be in the presence of these two guys. We have here one of the greatest players in America ever. And I have seen him work. I have seen him work on stage with a band. Impressed the heck out of me, and I've seen a lot of music. Then we have the great John Monteleone. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this for making carved top guitars. So when George called me up and said, I want you to be part of this little situation here, I was stunned. So I'm thanking these two guys for doing everything they do.
very cool. It's absolutely true what Matt says about John, anyway. Can you imagine? He gets chunks of wood and turns it into these. I can't do that. Can you? You know, that's chunks of wood, trees. He goes out in the woods, right? He looks at a tree and he goes, "Hey, yeah, that's good."
Yeah,
What?
I'll have that one.
Yeah. There's a
That
wonderful. What's the name of the film, John? The film, your film, the film about you. What's the title of it?
The film, it actually has my name, John Monteleone. The Chisels Are Calling.
The Chisels Are Calling.
Yeah.
Wonderful film. I got to see a showing of it a few weeks ago. I was stunned.
It is
If
great.
any of you have the opportunity to see it anywhere, whatever, I don't know if
Is that going to be
stream anywhere,
streamed
John?
at any time? Is it going to be streaming?
Yeah.
There was a screening here, but is it going to be streaming online?
It'll be streamed. I think December 15th is the date it starts streaming on Amazon Plus
Great.
and iTunes, somewhere else, a couple other places.
It's really worth seeing. The Chisels Are Calling.
And then it'll be released as a DVD, I believe, in January.
Cool. Very cool. So anyway, there's most of the guitars that we see, like the Martin Dreadnought that Matt was talking about, are flat top guitars. Now, John makes it with this wonderful sound hole, but you know, most of them got the round hole and they're flat on top. But then there's these carved archtop instruments, like you see a lot of these here. You want to talk about how that archtop developed, because that developed here in the United States, right?
Okay, so historically, we go back to this individual called Orville Gibson. We don't know a whole lot about Orville. He was kind of his own quiet kind of guy. There's very few photographs of him, not too much information, like where he came from, his roots, and et cetera, his training. That would be very interesting to know, because his talents were quite amazing to develop what he came up with. Now, I must also say that there were several other people prior to him who were attempting to make something that came from the violin world into the guitar world. And that was this idea of having a top and back carved, and these used to be called cello guitars at one point, because they have this size and relevance to perhaps a cello, but the violin building is where it comes from. Now, I must say right from the get-go that building a guitar based on the violin itself won't make a great guitar, and vice versa. They're two different animals, but they share something in common, and that is these plates, the top plate and the back plate. And the violin the world of violin has known about this for hundreds of years. The guitar world, it was something new to them by 1900 or so. And Orville Gibson was the guy who kind of picked up on that idea, making a carved top and carved back, and also he had hollow necks on these guitars. I think, is that one hollow?
No, that's not a hollow neck. That's
Okay.
solid.
But his patent, I think, originally had a hollow neck on it as well, and the body and the neck, the sides and neck were all one piece. So he had some pretty unique, far-out ideas that really laid the foundation for this thing to grow on. And so he sold the company within how many years?
I think 1904 he sells the company.
To an outfit in Kalamazoo.
CMI.
Was it?
Who did Gibson sell to?
Yeah,
no, in 1904, though, when Orville sold the
In
company.
1904, around
1904,
there.
the early
Yeah.
one, yeah.
Yeah, they formed a company, and he sold out. And but the company, luckily enough, picked up on that idea and developed a very successful company, the Gibson Company, in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And they developed a catalog pretty early on. I think the earliest catalog was 1903, if I'm correct. And then their successive catalogs from 1907, go right into World War I. I do have an original catalog from that. And then periodically they would issue catalogs. So would other companies, the competitive companies, along the way. But the Gibson Company was a very fascinating company in that they had some forward thinking that was relevant to the growth of these instruments. So they developed the family of guitars that were, this one right here is pretty early, that's 1917, that L1 right there, which pretty much represents what they were building up in the teen years prior to 1922. 1922, something happened within the company. Orville Gibson was long gone, had nothing to do with it anymore. But fortunately, there were some very clear thinking and talented people in the company at that time who took it forward to develop not only from this, but into 1920, 21, 22, they started inventing certain ideas that would play into the foundation and the function and the structure of the guitar, and the mandolins too, because it was the Gibson Mandolin and Guitar Company. That's what it was known as. So they had a full line, a catalog line of instruments that were sold not through dealers, they were sold through their teaching, a vast roster of teachers that they had that would sell the instruments to their students. That was the program. And the Gibson Company had very flowery catalogs. They really played on this idea of the violin. That's what we were talking about when we started talking about the relevance to the violin. Well, a violin is a bowed instrument. And these things are not bowed, they're plectrum instruments. And they're as well as finger style instruments, which is relative to plectrum anyway. So in the early days, finger style guitars, I guess Martins were played that way as well, finger style as well as flat picked, and all the rest of the competitive instruments were as well. But if you want to get back, I just want to get back to this idea of the difference between a violin and the guitar. So a violin being bowed has a sound post inside that sits underneath the treble foot of the bridge between the top and the back. So there's a positive connection directly between top and back there. That doesn't happen on these guitars. And then on the violin, there's one bass bar underneath the other foot of the bridge. We don't have that exactly in these guitars. There's a more sophisticated variation of that idea. So we have usually, well, I don't want to get into the too technical thing right now, but we can do that later. Let's just say there are very distinct differences, but that this idea of the vibrating plates and tap tuning plates, the top and the back, carving them to a point of an ultra-sensitive condition is something that is based on experience over time, hands-on over time, until you get it to a point of that you can repeat the idea repeatedly and successfully, building another instrument one after the other and the other. So I'll leave it there, but we can take it further if you want. Anytime.
John, to your knowledge, has anybody experimented with building carved top guitars using the violin principle of a sound post?
No.
Seems to me like it would not work, but I'm wondering if you know of anybody who's tried it.
No, but there were, remember in Jimmy DeQuisto's building, sometimes there were some guys who were complaining about feedback. Feedback became an issue with archtop instruments when they were played in a theater or in a big room where you get the feedback. They were a little bit more sensitive than flat tops in that regard. So to kill the feedback, Jimmy or someone would have him make these like little posts that would go between the top and back to try and kill it.
Uh-huh. Did it work?
No.
I didn't think so.
It killed the guitar.
I mean, I can see how the sound post would increase things in something the size of a violin. Something the size of a guitar seems like it would not work.
No, because it would have to be bowed, and the bow, what the bow does to the string.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
The bow would grab the string and repeatedly
whole other kind of vibration.
Pull it and pull it and pull it. If you were under a microscope, you could see the string getting grabbed, like microscopically, thousands of times per second. You know, it's just, and that's what makes this beautiful one sound.
So for anybody who can't visualize what we're talking about, that post in a violin is standing up. It's touching the back on the inside, it's touching the back, and it's touching the top. And it's about as big as, imagine if you took a Q-tip and cut the cotton off each end, and that stick that you had left, it's a little bigger than that Q-tip, right? Yeah. It's not a great big thing, but neither is a violin. It's a pretty small body, not a lot of volume in there. And the feedback that John was talking about is, now you're talking about like electric, right? An acoustic guitar won't feedback, will it?
Amplification in a theater.
Yeah, the amplification. So when you get loud with a hollow body guitar and the amp, and it's loud and it's coming through the room, so the sound's coming out of the amp, it's running, and it's going back into these archtop guitars, or flat tops too, they'll all feedback. It's going back into the body and making the body vibrate, almost like bowing. It keeps the note going. So you've passed that part where you were playing C, D, E, and those notes are still ringing from feedback. So that's what feedback is.
Yeah. And some musicians would make use of the
Some
the
musicians
feedback.
started making use to that.
It became a very useful tool here
in
and
the
there.
60s, yeah.
Musically.
Became a cool thing to do. I did a bit of it myself. Still do. So, yeah, so Orville Gibson. Now, the carved arch top. How thick of a piece of wood? Because I've read, I don't know if it's true, but I've read that Orville Gibson would start with some big chunks of wood and
Yeah.
carve them down.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, or part of the story is that he would invite some of his customers to bring in furniture
Right.
to be converted into like a guitar or a mandolin. And I'd seen some of the early Orville Gibson mandolins that were dead flat on the back.
Yes.
Because they came out of some piece of furniture, like a door or something like that. And then they were carved. So, yeah, these guitars would start out basically with about three quarters of an inch to 1 inch thick as a flat block of wood, of spruce, let's say, and maple. That's what these are, spruce tops and maple backs. So it'd be 1 inch thick, and that has to get carved. I'd say maybe 90%, 95% of it is just carved away as waste. It's that other 5% that you leave behind that is really what counts. So you have to have good visualization, and you can really see and hear what it is that's on your workbench that you're carving away.
When John talked about tap tuning, if you see the chisels are calling, he holds up, as he's carving, he holds up the piece of wood and he taps it, and he hears the ring of it. Even when he's buying a new piece of wood that he's going to use, he'll tap it, and he hears the ring. Yeah, that's the good ring. That's the bad ring. I'll cut more off to get it where I want it. The Orville Gibson instruments, made by Orville in the 1890s, very, very early 1900, 1901, some of them are so beautiful to look at. I've never heard one that sounds good. Have you?
Very heavily built.
They're very heavily built, and they're not the best instruments ever made. But boy, they're cool to look at.
It was a concept.
It was a concept for sure. He started something. Here we are tonight. You know.
Well, like anything else, it takes time for a design to evolve. And somebody maybe builds a guitar, and it's all heavily built and all this. And, gee, where's the sound? I think I'll fool around with that design. And it takes time. The designs of this stuff do not spring up whole overnight.
No, it took, as I started saying, it's taken thousands of years to get to the point that John makes these incredible instruments. Okay, so the archtop instrument really, I think, became vital. When's the first L5? 22? 23?
Okay, 22 is the first cataloged L5.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Gibson Company, there was this man, Lloyd Loar.
Lloyd Loar.
Want to talk about Lloyd a little?
Yeah. Lloyd Loar was not a guitar builder, a guitar maker by any means, but he was an acoustician, and he was also a professor who taught at Northwestern University, and he taught physics of music, and he somehow, I don't know how it happened, that he connected with the Gibson Company, but he did, as this acoustician who signed the labels of these specially approved instruments from 1922 to 1924. These were, today they became known as Loar's or Lloyd Loar instruments, but they're really Gibson instruments with his name on the label. And they're cherished today, especially the mandolins. So there was a family of mandolin, mandola, mandocello, and the guitar. The guitar was the L5, F5, K5, the
Tenor guitar, TG-L5.
H5, right, and then the L5. So that was the big four that was being pushed at the time, 1922. Oddly enough, the mandolin, which they had intended it to be focused more toward a, let's say, an orchestral type of an instrument, really didn't have an audience for it. It really hadn't found its audience until Bill Monroe comes along in 1937, was it?
35,
35?
37.
and he finds one of these F5 mandolins in a barber shop in Florida, right? And previous to that, he was playing an F7, which is a dumbed down version of the F5. So he picks up the F5 and it becomes his instrument, and that is now, all this time, the iconic mandolin for bluegrass. He was the father of bluegrass. So that is the most cherished mandolin in the market.
And the most expensive. You're talking a couple $100,000 to get a good one.
Yeah.
Well, that series of mandolins also has that scroll in the body, that asymmetrical thing that I'm sure many of you, George, there you go. And
Which is an Orville Gibson thing, and I was
it is a Gibson thing, but it has been said, and I believe it 100%, the biggest asset of having this here, you could put a strap in it.
Me and John were laughing this afternoon, like, why did Orville put that walrus scroll thing on there? You know, what was he thinking? Because, as Matt says, I don't think it does much for the sound. Do you, John? Does it?
No, the scrolls, in fact, on those mandolins, not this one here, this is more hollow.
Right.
But the Gibson ones,
They're blocked.
They're half solid.
Yeah.
So they were more for a design effect. It's interesting that if you look back at the early Gibson designs, it seems to have some Turkish influence, which might, in my mind anyway, explain some of the more floral type of design. It's a little bit out there. So
Orville Gibson's an old Turkish name, you know. I mean.
Of course
But yeah,
it is.
he did. He would put the little crescent moon.
Yeah.
He would inlay that in pearl
And a star.
up in the headstock, or maybe in the pick guard down there. So, as John said, he was kind of a mysterious guy, Orville. The couple of photos that there are of him, there's one where he's got this incredible outfit, these wide striped pants, this strange jacket, and like a big piece of satin ribbon tied here. And he's, what's going on, Orville? You know. And apparently he was a shoe salesman before he quit selling shoes and started making the guitars. But he obviously knew something about carving wood, right?
Did he make wooden shoes?
Yeah, I don't know. You press the bottom of the thing. I think it got turned. There you go.
Did he make wooden shoes? I don't think so.
Clumping, the clogs. No, I don't think so. So, Orville Gibson, the Gibson Company, in the very early 20s, Lloyd Lloyd's there, and they start making this L5 guitar, which this is an L5 from 30, Howard?
That was a tenor L5.
It started as a tenor, a 4-string.
That was renecked at the factory.
Right, but is it a 1930?
1930.
Yeah. Now this instrument here is from 28, yes? It's modeled, the model number on the label says L10, which was a cheaper version of the L5, but this particular one, John thinks maybe it was made for a trade show or something. It's an L5. It is the top of the line, the whole structure of it. As soon as I picked it up today, I could tell by the weight that it wasn't an L10. I've owned a lot of old L10s. They're lighter guitars. This is an L5. So this instrument came along, 16 inches across the lower bout. What is it across the top? Top bout?
16.
No,
It's 16 down there.
yeah, the upper was, I think, around
13, 12?
Around 13.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, right away, guys that played in jazz orchestras that could afford to get this guitar got it because it projected this thing that they had figured out, and they had really figured it out by then, how to get the sound out of the instrument. See the holes here? They're called F-holes, just like a violin, right? Those holes that are carved in to kind of let the sound out of the top. So the L5 became quite a big deal. You see a lot of pictures of guys in the very sharply dressed, tuxedo guys in the 20s, 30s, and they're playing these. See, they started out just putting little pearl dots and then these big pearl blocks so they could charge more.
They get fancier.
It got fancier. And as the guitar got more expensive, like everything else we were talking about, it got bigger. The L5 went to 17 inches instead of 16 down here, and the top part got bigger as well. And then in 1934, they started making a thing called a Super 400, 18 inches, but still kept better, bigger, better, louder, faster.
Well,
Press that
the
button.
race was on. I think the
race
race
was on.
from the 20s, because you have a lot of live performance that was happening, radio, recording, but live performance was asking something else from the manufacturer. And manufacturers listened to the musician as well, vice versa. It went both ways. But they would answer to the musician's needs. They would try to. Ultimately, that would be the success of the company. Unless they were so innovative enough to come up with a brand new instrument, something, let's say, iconic. Certainly, Leo Fender was one of those. But the race for volume was happening along with the growth of the orchestras. Big bands were starting to come on the scene. And that's really where the ultimate 18-inch and even a 19-inch one, Stromberg made the 19-inch.
Thank you. You will notice, what do I do with this?
There's a thing on the bottom. You gotta press.
Okay, there we go. If you look at films of 1930s jazz bands, you see them in movies or whatever little films, the guitar is, for the most part, a rhythm instrument. Guys are just stroking away. It's a background rhythm instrument. There were those few soloists, Eddie Lang and Charlie Christian, and in my mind, the Mills Brothers. You find a solo instrument there, but basically a bigger one, more sound out of it.
Yeah, there was also a lot of cowboy actors were picking up on fancy guitars, flashy stuff. The fancy Martins, the fancy Gibsons,
That's
the
the
J200.
cowboy thing.
Cowboys,
Yeah.
films, westerns.
Gene Autry.
Gene Autry,
And like so many of us,
Roy Rogers.
well, I know for me, and I wouldn't be too surprised if George and a lot of guys here of more or less our baby boomer age, growing up in the 50s, we wanted to learn how to ride a horse, play a guitar, and shoot a Colt 45 all at the same time. It was a goal.
So guys like Gene Autry, Martin guitars, the great flat top American guitars, had always been very plain. I grew up in Pennsylvania, very near the Martin factory. And when I was a teenager, we didn't want Martins. They just looked so plain to us, and they were from right down the road and stuff. We wanted Gibsons with the fancy inlays and the birds on the pickguard and, fancy finishes. Martins were blonde, plain, dots in the fingerboard. But in the 30s...
Well, in the 30s, you have Gene Autry, whose name was in large circus letters on the fingerboard, Gene Autry. But the first guitar Martin did like that, Jimmy Rogers.
Yes.
1929. And I am going to be able to see that guitar in a few weeks because I'm going to be in Meridian, Mississippi, where that guitar is. I'm excited about this.
Yeah. Yeah, Jimmy Rogers, big name. The singing brakeman.
Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman, all around the Watchtower, and waiting for a train, those 1920s songs of the Depression. And he was the first guy, I believe, to say to the Martin Company, put my name in great big letters. And of course, later on in the 40s and 50s, you see it on all those fancy Gibsons, Furlan Husky, and
all the
all
country
the
guys.
cowboy guys.
Didn't was it Ernest Tubb that had on the back
On
of
the
his
back,
guitar?
thanks a lot.
Yeah.
The
He
great
would
big words.
turn the
that-
guitar over at the end of the
Yeah,
show.
turn it over, yeah.
Thanks a lot. That might have been tape on the back, but he had his name in the neck. So Martin starts then tastefully also using pearl for inlays, like on their upper models, like the D45,
Well,
the
pearl where? You
D42,
mean pearl like around the body?
and pearl around the sound hole.
But you find that as early as 1903.
Yeah.
And I had the good fortune, via the good graces of C.F. Martin III, who ran the Martin Company from the 1930s till he died in the 80s, to hook up with the company that had made all the mother of pearl inlay for Martin out in Queens, right out somewhere in Queens. Handel was the name. Martin was doing those little inlays, little star fingerboard inlays, always understated. These people, again, very conservative, but pearl around the edges, or abalone shell, actually, abalone trim. And in fact, for those of you who are kind of Martin nuts, the Martin model numbering system, a D or a few zeros or something with a dash, followed by a two-digit number, the two-digit number running anywhere from 15 to 45. Originally, back in the 19th century, those numbers came from the pricing of the guitars. It had a number 21, it was $21, et cetera, et cetera. And $45 was as high as they got.
And Gibson started doing that with a lot of their guitars in the 30s. That Super 400 that I mentioned was $400, which in 1934 was a whole bunch of money.
But Ditson, the thing is, all those Ditson guitars, and Ditson especially ukuleles that Martin made, and it has the Martin name and the Ditson name. Ditson was not a guitar manufacturer. Ditson was a music publishing company. And they had instruments made so that they could sell. It was like an extra line of goods. And when their guys were going around trying to sell music to people, oh, here, and I have this nice ukulele. Would you like to buy that as well?
Well, ghosting was a big part of manufacturing. I think all the companies were ghosting for other other
Explain
marks
ghosting.
at the
Explain
time.
ghosting.
Yeah. So Martin had like a dozen ghosts that they were making for Gibson.
More than that.
More than that, yeah.
Dick Boak, who dug out all of Martin's treasures. These people had everything they had ever used since the 1830s. He found receipts for like glue, 43 cents for a glue brush, dated 1847. And amongst the stuff, he found all the name stamps that they had used for all the different companies that they made instruments for. Ditson and, it was one in Jersey City. I forget. I'm forgetting a lot these days, but there were many. And they still have them.
Yeah. Yeah, there was also catalogs. Catalog sales were big, like Montgomery Ward, Sears catalog. These were reaching the far corners of America in rural areas, selling vast numbers of copies of these instruments, basically. And so that was the competition. But I think the competition really went well into the popularization, the popularity of the instrument and the music as well. That was affordable, more affordable to the population. Am I right on that?
All that catalog stuff you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, and all those guitars with came out of Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery Ward. You could order for $12, and that had stencil painted pictures on them, singing cowboys. My first guitar was a singing cowboys guitar, and guitars that were tied to cowboy movie stars of the day. Buck Jones in silver. I had one of those, and actually, at a certain point. It's almost embarrassing to admit this, but over the years that I would be going to vintage guitar shows to find stuff for my store, whenever I would see one of these cheap stencil-painted guitars that I didn't already have, I'd buy it. And there was in the basement of my store, there was an old unused elevator freight car. I filled it, and when I closed the store, there were 102 of them in there. I sold them all. But every movie cowboy, all the Roy Rogers guitars in different variations, and the Sears and Montgomery Ward stuff too. There's an interesting sidelight to all this. For those of you who are Marx Brothers fans, the Marx Brothers, their mother insisted that they all be musicians. Harpo, of course, and Chico with the piano. Groucho was a guitar player. And Groucho had several L5s just like that one right there. And there was one Marx Brothers movie where he's out in a canoe serenading some young woman, and he's playing the guitar. And he's playing, I've spotted it, he's playing a 1920s or 30s L5. And at some point, he throws a guitar into the water. Cut. It's not the L5.
It's not the L5.
It's one of those cheap catalog guitars.
There's another Marx Brothers movie where one of them is playing an F5 mandolin.
I never saw that.
And you see them, and he picks it up and he puts it in the top open drawer of, like the top drawer of a dresser, and slams the dresser shut. And of course, it's not the actual Gibson, it's some cheapo thing that he sticks in there. But the first 10 times I saw that, I went, ah. You know.
If you want to see really fabulous movies, try to look up Dave Apollon. The Dave Apollon movies, they're pretty rare. They would be B-grade movies.
Apollon, Apollon.
One P, two L's.
One P, two L's. Apollon. Okay,
that's
like
right.
that.
So, yeah. He not only produced the movies, he acted in them and he played the music in them, and he was also the dancer in the movie. He did everything, soup to nuts, in the movies. But he was a phenomenal mandolinist. I'll let you explore Dave Apollon. You'll see for yourself incredible movies, and they're pretty funny.
Can you find that stuff on YouTube?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, Dave's on there. We're on. This talk that we gave tonight, the whole thing, the part that we haven't even done yet, is already on YouTube. I've done shows, been out like playing in a place, and as I'm coming off stage, somebody shows me their phone and the show is already on YouTube. It's so quick now, it's amazing. What did I want to tell you guys? Something. Spaced out.
I can say one thing about the guitar. Something fascinating about the guitar, unlike any other musical instrument on the planet, it is the only instrument that everything that you can imagine being applied to the guitar has been done or is being done and will be done. It's just one of those canvases that you have the basic foundation of the guitar being the success of what it is musically, simple as it is, but then you can come along and you can do all these things to it. You can change the color, you have all these wild colors, you can paint designs on it, you can inlay it to death. You can do and you can tune it in all different kinds of tunings. In fact, that L5 right there is in an open tuning. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's an open chord tuning. It belongs to Howard over here, and he is an open style player, finger style player. This is one of the things that really grabbed me back when I was starting to build. I would have guys come to my shop like Howard and a few other guys. Michael Katz was another one. Billy McEwen was another. These guys were playing L5s. And they were coming to my shop and playing things that I hadn't heard before, played on an archtop guitar. And this kind of thing really opened my mind to possibility. I said, okay, there is potential here for the archtop guitar that hasn't really come to fruition yet for a variety of reasons. Builders who were building, who I had great respect for, Jimmy DeQuisto, was coming into a time where he was building his own ideas after coming out of a very traditional training period or building like D'Angelico there, that blonde. He trained with D'Angelico, who was a great, great builder of archtop guitars, very celebrated. Jimmy was a student of his. So when John dies, Jimmy takes over, and everybody expects him to be building John's guitars. What comes out of that is Jimmy had his own ideas, and he felt very trapped by being confined to this. So he just broke out. One day, the door just opened, and he turned and went down this other avenue of building his own designs, which were based fundamentally on the traditional idea, but it was taking the guitar into this new avenue of expression for the musician. Really, the success of the guitar, any musical instrument, really comes down to the musician who's going to be playing it, who's making music on it. If it doesn't serve that purpose, it's really not serving much of any other purpose, really. So the idea of coming out of this period of tradition in the face of rejection, because tradition says to people, that's what I expect to see. If I'm seeing something different, they're not used to it, so it's not a traditional value yet, and it may take time to be accepted. So he was willing to throw that in the air and go his own way, and I learned from that and respected that myself, in that to be an artist, to express yourself artistically as a maker, to me, I felt it was very important to do that if the possibility was there to do it. So I don't know where else I was going with that idea, but I'll save that for your questions later.
I've always been fascinated by, in whatever year you want to pick, in 1870, somebody walks into a shop and looks at guitars. Why do they want a guitar? What are they going to play on it? Some years ago, it was one of Martin's anniversaries, 150 years or something, and Christian Martin, when he came to the United States, landed, and he wound, the boat came from Europe, and they landed downtown, probably down at the bottom of the Hudson River there, down the bottom of the island. And I always get this, I know I'm making this up completely, but I get this image in my mind as he's walking up Hudson Street, and his wife goes, hey, Christian, 6 weeks on the boat, the kids are tired, we're tired, get something for us to, get a building, get a storefront, something, I gotta lay down. And he rents a shop down on Hudson Street. So anyway, it's his anniversary, and the city of New York is gonna put a plaque up where that building was. Now, the building, of course, is long gone, and there's a big office place there.
I was there at the ceremony.
You were there?
Yeah.
So I went, Martin talked to me and said, would you play, at this event, at this dinner that we're going to have? And so I went. They have a great museum in Nazareth with guitars. I think they still don't have an 1833, but they do have an 1834. Nobody's found an 1833
Well,
guitar.
how do they know the exact year? These things aren't dated.
They at least say this
Yes.
one's 1834.
I think they
It's a
hung
romantic
they hung
instrument.
a number on it because people are looking for numbers.
Yeah, you're probably right. Anyway, I got a very early one. I picked one from the museum from the 1840s. I picked a Civil War era one. And then I researched what got played on these. Why did a man or a woman get a guitar back then? What did they play? And what I found was almost everything that was a hit back in those times, stuff that people really played, we know all those songs. In the Civil War, I'll play this one because I love it. The biggest hit of the Civil War was such a big hit that there is written several times that, they wouldn't usually fight at night because they couldn't see each other. But in the morning, they would. At night, they would sing it. across the field, the north and the south. They'd sing that song back and forth to each other, and then in the morning get up and kill each other. The song was such a big hit. So in that era, in the early 1860s, somebody would walk into a store because they wanted to play The Girl Left Behind. I was always fascinated by that. So when somebody got this guitar, in the 20s, they were probably going to play all kinds of stuff, because you can play anything. As John mentioned before, you can play any kind of music on any guitar. It's just 6 strings on a plane, right, in space. But they were playing like... Here it's chop, 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 chop. They played what's called 4 to the bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. It was a rhythm instrument, basically. People didn't really start, you know. They didn't start soloing like that because you couldn't hear them. When electric guitars finally came along, 33, 34, then guitar players started taking solos. And to me, the great guy for that is Charlie Christian. He was the first person that took the electric guitar and heard the potential of it, you know? And I was always fascinated by that. What did they play? In the second half of the 19th century, after the Civil War, guitars became a thing for young ladies of quality to learn to play the guitar. Before that, they played the piano. But now, a lot of women play guitar, and a lot of those Martins got bought for women to play.
Parlor guitars.
What they call now a parlor guitar, because they played them in the parlor, you know, Sunday afternoon. Think about it. Before about 1920, roughly, if you wanted to hear music, you either had to play it yourself or go over to somebody's house that knew how to play something, right? Or go to a show.
Before the term parlor guitars started getting bandied about 20 years ago, and everybody uses it, back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, people called those little Martins, ladies' guitars.
Ladies' guitars.
Yeah.
Because they were. Anyway, so so John makes these fabulous guitars, and you can see it's got this other hole on the side. So tell us about that, John. Why is that there?
Yeah. Well, it all started when I was building my first guitar. I was about 14 years old. And as I finished the guitar and I'm playing it, I laid my ear right on the side of the guitar like that, directly, and I heard something different. I said, how can I get that sound? And that idea just haunted me for years and years and years. I wasn't able to really get to it until in the 1990s. I built a guitar for Scott Chinnery. Actually, I was building it for myself as an experiment. It turned out that it went into the Chinnery collection. But that guitar was an experiment to really try out this idea of, you see, what happens with archtop guitars when you're playing them, especially F-hole guitars like this, they project very well out front, a little bit easier and quicker than a round hole version of the same kind of guitar even. So the F-holes really project quite well, to the point that the guy who's playing the guitar is not hearing exactly what's coming out front. So that idea got me to thinking, how can I get that sound to come to me directly? And the guitars were, I think in the 80s, as the recording industry and the cabaret licensing and all this stuff was changing, studio work was changing, the guitar was becoming more of an intimate home instrument, I think, and with home recording as well to reinforce that idea. So the guitar was becoming a more intimate kind of a tool, to the point where even the smaller guitars were starting to become more popular again, parlor guitars. So today we have that. Where was I actually going with that idea, though?
I don't know, but I like it.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, the side sound. I call it side sound. That's trademarked as side sound. And you can't just go ahead and put a hole in the side of the guitar without putting it into jeopardy structurally. And I found out that if you put a hole in the side of the guitar, you're interrupting the continuity between the top of the guitar and the back of the guitar. You're interrupting it to the point where there is a difference in sound. So how to restore that idea was the problem structurally. So I came up with a way of constructing it into the side of the guitar. It's built right into the side. My first guitars, some of them, I think one of them has even sliding panels that open and close. I did that so I could find out what the effect was. I needed to learn what this thing was going to do. So I was willing to take the risk. I wanted it to be the me guitar. I didn't care if it was going to be out there to entertain the audience, not necessarily. I wanted the musician to really have the full benefit of the sound. So that was the experiment. I had each of the sound holes, even on the front, all open and closable independently, so I could really learn from this thing. And what I learned was, not only did it sound really good to me, the sound was coming right at my head. The sound out front was just about the same. There was hardly any difference at all. So it was really successful in both ways. So at that point, it became the us guitar. And the majority of guitars that I make today still have this side sound built into them. And again, you know, the idea of tradition, going against tradition, it wasn't that acceptable right away until you just put that guitar on somebody's lap and had them play it, and immediately they got the idea. Of course, it's a no-brainer. So there it is.
Well, the sound, it's great. When you're playing it, the sound comes up that side hole and it goes right in your ear, which I've got my hearing aids on tonight because, like, I'm a deaf guy because I played years and years really loud, you know, and was on stage with other guys that were louder than me, you know, so my ears are destroyed. But, man, when I sat down and played John's guitars this afternoon, I was like, oh, yeah, you can really hear it. All right, completely whoop, sideways turn. I have a question for both of you guys. Some of the greatest acoustic guitars, flat top, round hole acoustic guitars, I think it's pretty much generally agreed, were made in the 1930s by both Martin and Gibson and some other people like the Larson brothers and a few other people, but basically Martin and Gibson. And a lot of them are made, so they're all spruce on top, okay? Pine trees, they're spruce on top. The back and sides, there's a lot of them. I love mahogany guitars, but then a lot of them are made with rosewood, particularly this thing called Brazilian rosewood that came from Brazil. And it has come over time to be a real, like, price premium and a status premium if you have a Brazilian rosewood guitar. What do you think?
What's the question?
The question is Brazilian rosewood of itself really better than rosewood from India or Africa or Guatemala?
Am I coming through here? There's no such thing as better when it comes to sound.
But why do people think it's better? Why do they cost more?
It costs more because it costs more to get it. But it sounds different. In a blindfold test, they definitely sound different. Certainly, and John will, I'm sure, back me up on this. Mahogany for the back and sides, it doesn't vibrate in quite the same way or as much as rosewood does, and you have fewer overtones. It's a simpler sound. If you look at the waveform, it's simpler. Rosewood, it's more complex. You get tonal complexities there. Brazilian rosewood versus East Indian rosewood, which comes from over there, they sound different. Martin always used nothing but rosewood, which Brazilian rosewood was all that they thought about, up until, around 1900 or 1910, when they finally said, we need some cheaper guitars, we're going to make some with mahogany back and sides. The Brazilian rosewood thing went away because it was becoming an endangered species, and the Brazilian government didn't want to let it out in the late 60s. Part of the reason was they wanted their mills to get the extra money from cutting it up. Instrument makers can't deal with that. They have to cut the logs the way they need them cut. But at a certain point, it became an endangered species, and after late 68 or 69 or so, it became, Martin couldn't get it. Nobody could get it. And so they switched over to Indian rosewood. Sound better? Well, I'll say it sounds more, but I'll tell you, I've had a lot of Martin guitars in that store, thousands of them over the years. You can pick up some Indian rosewood Martins. They sound wonderful. Do they sound different than a Brazilian rosewood version of the same model? Yes. What sounds better? Well, what did you have for dinner tonight? If you had too much garlic, maybe you're thinking a different way. You're hearing a different way. But it's not a matter of sounds better. They're just different.
I think the sound, it's subjective. The way people hear these sounds, they become like flavors. I think of Brazilian rosewood myself as something more chocolatey, kind of. It just has this richness to it.
Well, there's a certain clarity to it. There's a certain cleanliness to the tone that does not exist with Indian rosewood. I tend to think of Indian rosewood, the tone of it is more of a round. I mean, I hate to use the word, but it's different.
Right. Well, Indian rosewood now, they used to be available to us old growth Indian rosewood, which these days it's becoming even that more scarce to find. Some of that really gorgeous, beautiful Indian rosewood that took the place of the other one.
But again, it's not a matter of sounds better. It's just different. And one thing which the Martin Company almost never did was make any of their guitars with maple back and sides. And that has a whole different kind of sound. They made a few in the 70s and 80s, one or two models, and that was it. And there's a certain mid-range, John could probably explain this better than me, but to my ear, the maple guitar, the sound of a flat-top steel string guitar with maple back and sides, a lot of Gibsons from the 1960s, those Hummingbirds and Doves and the J200s, what you hear on a lot of the rock stuff from the rock and roll records from the 60s, where there's an acoustic guitar chunking away in the background, there's a certain mid-rangey sound there. That's a maple guitar.
The Rolling Stones, all those great Stones records,
Yeah, there it
60s,
is, yeah.
70s, 80s.
There's the guy who knows.
They're playing Gibson Hummingbirds. I got to work with Mick Jagger for a few years, and they had bought a whole bunch of them. And that's the sound that you hear, the way that Keith Richards strummed that Hummingbird.
And it's a maple back and sides.
Yeah, maple back and sides
It's
guitar.
a unique kind of sound. Is it better? Worse? No. But
Different.
boy, is it recognizable? You bet.
And it records well.
Yeah.
Maple kicks out frequencies that a microphone loves. Sometimes these like really great Brazilian rosewood Martins from the 1935, 1936, it's just the most desired acoustic guitar that there is now. They don't record well because there's too much.
That's always been the case, and we would tell people that in the store. Rosewood, it's a richer sound, but if you're going to be in front of a microphone, boy, the microphone will not like it.
Yeah.
Mahogany will do a lot better.
I love mahogany guitars. I like the D18, which was a cheaper Martin, rather than a D28. I've always loved the D18s. Anyway, so John, tell us about this guitar.
This particular guitar
and a little bit about, you know.
Where it comes from? Okay, so this is a Selmer guitar made by the Selmer Company in 1940, this one. They had a production period between 1934 and 1954, somewhere in that range. This particular guitar, how many people know Django Reinhardt?
Personally?
Okay. His guitar was serial number 503. This guitar is serial number 504. So it's a brother or a sister to that guitar. His guitar is in the museum in Paris, and this one is here with you tonight. So this was also owned by Stokolo Rosenberg of the Rosenberg Trio. There's another one you should look up. Check out Rosenberg Trio. Amazing, phenomenal music and musicianship. So that's what this is. So this guitar was designed more or less by Mario McAferry, who was a dear friend of mine, who designed the first set of guitars for the Selmer Company back in 1930. They were well known for their clarinets and saxophones, reed instruments, but they wanted to get into the guitar business. So they had heard about this guy McAferry who built guitars and everything else. And they hired him to design a series of guitars for their catalog. There was a Hawaiian model, there was a Spanish model, a classical model, and a jazz model. This was known as a jazz model. And it's funny because Mario himself was a phenomenal classical guitarist of some renown back in France and Italy in his youth. And until he had broken his hand, he was destined to be something of a Segovia type of talent. But after the breaking of the hand, he went back into something he knew. He was trained as a luthier since he was 11 years old. So he started designing his own instruments, and that's how he came to the attention of Selmer. Okay, so Selmer asked him to make a jazz guitar. Well, I asked Mario one day, I said, well, did you ever meet Django? No. Why? I didn't like jazz. And they asked you to design a jazz guitar? Yeah. So what'd you do? Well, I went to Place Pigalle to learn and study what jazz is about. What is this thing called jazz? So I said, well, what is it? He says, well, if you take a bundle of metal rods in your hand and smack them on the table, that's jazz. So with that, he borrowed on some interesting techniques coming from the European mandolin, which uses a folded top. If you ever see the bowl-back mandolins, take a look at the top on them. You'll see right across the bridge line, the top is bent. And they call that a folded top. Yeah, you can see it on here a little bit, where the bridge is a little bit. It's pretty subtle. But what that does, it gives a particular strength to a very, very thin membrane of spruce. So you can make it thinner, but it's strong. And then he developed what's called a D sound hole. This sound hole here came after he left the company, but the D sound hole was his idea, and it's found on the earlier instruments that predate this. So Django Reinhardt made this design very popular. Even today, it is the most copied Django or Django jazz type of guitar there is. Many people copy that, just like Martins are copied. In the gypsy world, that's copied.
Yeah, if you're in Europe and you'll hear some guys playing in the square somewhere, if they're Roma, Sinti, gypsy guys, they're playing one of these. You know, now I can't play like Django Reinhardt. If you don't know,
You have too many fingers.
what's that?
You have too many fingers.
If you don't know his music, go on YouTube and you'll see his hand got burned in a fire, his left hand, and this finger are kind of burned off and fused into this little thing. I don't think he spent a lot of time at the hospital, Jen.
Yeah, George, what's the movie from maybe 20 years ago about a guy who wanted to become a great guitar player, and he worshipped Django Reinhardt, and
With Sean Penn.
Sean Penn. Yeah, what's the name of the movie? What's that? Sweet and Low Down. Yeah, and at the end, he finally met him, and he collapsed. Yeah.
Great stuff. Anyway, if you didn't ever listen to Django, go on YouTube, look up Django, D-J-A-N-G-O, Reinhardt. Amazing. 2 figures, and he's playing better than almost anybody else ever. So I can't play like him, but this guitar, I've played a few of these before, and I was not impressed, you know? This one is amazing. It's... that's got a lot of sound coming out, you know? It's, play anything on this guitar. Fella could have a whole career. Anyway, sorry?
So small. How is that possible? I don't understand.
The instrument's small.
But the sound holes.
Oh, the sound hole, yes, John. How is the sound
Okay.
getting out?
Right, okay. So that's a good question. If you look at a violin, you'll see that the sound holes on the violin are really small too. Okay. So it's the sound of, the size of the sound holes really are shaping the sound more so than they are controlling the volume of sound. Sound is coming off the outside of the guitar as well as the inside. Of course, more sound is being amplified within the body of the guitar, and it's being projected out through the sound hole. But there is sound also coming off the body itself on the exterior. So basically, the largeness of the sound hole really has some influence on the tone of the instrument. And we can, in the Martin D28s, we could see that when Tony Rice got a hold of Clarence White's guitar, where the sound hole was enlarged.
Yeah, they wore it down from playing so hard, and later on, Martin made a Clarence White or Tony Rice model with that oversized sound hole, and I can't tell you how many times people would come to me wanting to order custom Martins. They wanted the bigger sound hole because it was going to let more sound out.
No. And then there's Willie Nelson's guitar.
Right.
Well, the Willie hole, yeah.
Trigger.
But I'll tell you something else about sound holes. Jimmy DeQuisto made some of his guitars, his carved top guitars, and a few flat tops with oval sound holes. And I asked him why one day, and he said, did you ever take a garden hose and you squeeze it down into an oval and the water shoots out faster? That's why I make oval sound holes, because the sound shoots out faster. How much truth there was in it, I don't know, but this is what he was telling me.
I love it. Does anyone have any questions? April.
Can you please play John's?
One of John's guitars, absolutely.
Just so, and if you can find like one that's about the same body size as the one that you just played, like this, yeah.
Yeah. Now this is a flat top. John, I think, is most well known as an archtop guitar maker, but obviously he can make anything he wants.
I just wanted to hear a comparison between one you just played and
Right. Now remember, that one that I just played is from 1940. This one is from
2 years ago?
2 years ago. I'll do the math. 2020. Took me a second, I'm sorry. I'm old. Come on.
that is one of the most beautiful guitars I've ever seen.
Yes, April just said that this is one of the most beautiful guitars she's ever seen. And I will say, and I think Matt will agree with me, and I think between me and Matt, we've seen about as many guitars as could be seen. Certainly, he's seen even more than me. But John's guitars are not only in sound and playability at the absolute pinnacle of anything that's ever been made, but in the dexterity of the craftsmanship and the beauty of the finished product. They're unmatched. John D'Angelico made very beautiful guitars, gorgeous work. This is heresy.
A lot of them lacked.
Huh?
A lot of them lacked.
A lot of them lacked a certain something.
Yeah.
John's guitars have.
And you know, I have seen at some guitar makers shows just displays of people who make a fair amount of them carved top guitars, archtop guitars, and they're beautifully made, and we have to call them TE guitars, tone extra. Oh, they're gorgeous. Oh, you want tone too? Oh, that's something else.
Sorry. Tone extra. I love it.
Yeah. Beautifully done, gorgeous to look at, and where's the sound?
Now remember, this was chunks of wood.
A tree.
This was some trees. What? How did he do that? Oh, and this has the little door he was talking about. Oh my God. So you can slide that shut.
Yeah.
Right? Amazing. That even feels good to do it. That's not like closing your refrigerator. That's.
I'm just curious, John. How long did it take you to make that?
This particular guitar?
Yeah, 2 years of it.
It's probably about 2 months of work.
And you make your guitars to order. So GE says, damn, I just played that. And
Yeah.
calls me tomorrow and says, make me one.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Are there anyone you make?
The number to call is,
John, how long of a wait list do you have?
well, I pared it down. I kind of put a limit on it, but I was back ordered for about 6 years. Yeah.
So you order one,
John,
you get it in 2028.
I'm remembering something now that I had forgotten all about until just this moment. That some years ago, Christopher Guest, the Spinal Tap guy, who was a local village kid, we knew each other for a long time, he called me up and he said he wanted a Monteleone mandolin. And I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And you put one together from a maple tree that had grown in your backyard as a kid or something like that, and pretty quickly too. I totally forgot about that until this moment.
I had this is another story, I suppose, but I used to heat my house with wood entirely years ago, and I would go around with my truck picking up logs off the street, whatever wood I could find. And I passed my house, my old house where I grew up, and there was a familiar object across the street on the ground, and it was my old tree house that the town had cut down. I recognized it as my tree house. I threw it in the back of the truck, and I split the wood open for my fire stove. And as I split it open, the sunlight reflected on it. I could see this beautiful curl in the wood. I said, oh, that's interesting. Who would have thought that in Islip, wood grows like this, a tree grows like that? Okay, so I split enough to make several violins and a mandolin. And there you have it.
It went to Chris Guest. Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
Can you play the guitar for her?
I'll play this. So, as I said before, a lot of guys like to look at an archtop and they think, I gotta play jazz. But on any guitar, you can play any kind of music.
If you play heavy metal on the oboe, the music police will not come and arrest you.
The music police are busy at the opera. They're not coming for us.
Thank you, Joseph Spence.
Joseph Smith. This little hole?
Yeah, does that change it for us or just for you?
That's for him.
That's for me.
This one out front's for you.
Of all the guitars that are here tonight, and I played them all this afternoon, like for a while, this is my favorite, maybe because it's like a flat top and it's kind of what I'm used to, Any more questions? Sir in the front.
You were talking something Before about, I'm sorry, about raw wood itself has a tone at the stage before it's starting to get into, you were tapping on raw wood to listen for a tone. Is that possible?
Tapping on wood for tone?
When you're searching for raw wood, are you just looking for looks,
Well,
structure, or?
raw wood comes to us in different ways. The tree itself, if you tap, there's a romantic idea that Stradivari would go around tapping on trees for listening for the tone. There's no way, that's impossible to get a tone off of a tree like that. No, the wood has to be cut and split first before and seasoned would help. Yeah, seasoning the wood is where you allow the moisture to come out of the wood to leave it, and it becomes more stabilized and more resonant. So at that point, when it becomes resonant, you can tap it. If you're holding it in the right places, you can figure that out. And I'm listening for a particular kind of bell-like quality in the wood. For sustain, for one, I'm listening to also the fundamental and the overtones that I can get off that. Just a simple tap, it'll tell you that wood has potential. And different woods will have different the same tree, if you're tapping on different split outs from that same tree, you're going to have different results, not exactly the same. They might be relative, but not. That's why you would go through a stack of wood and tap each split to figure which one is the best of the bunch.
Howard?
It's kind of a two-part question. I'd like to know why you haven't mentioned Mother Maybelle Carter, whose main guitar, and she's really the mother of bluegrass, she played an L5. And the other thing was Martin made the first dreadnought for the Ditz and Company. Why didn't they make it with a Martin name on it right away?
They made the first what?
The first
Martin made
dreadnought.
the first dreadnought for Ditz.
Oh.
Why didn't they make it for themselves?
I guess it didn't occur to them. They got asked to make it. We need a bigger one. I'm assuming Dick Boak would know the answer to that, but that's a reasonable assumption. They were not into innovation. Again, these people were and still are very, very, very conservative. And I would imagine that they got asked by Ditson, make us something bigger. It's a reasonable guess, I think.
And the reason I didn't mention Mother Maybelle was because I forgot. Howard, thanks. But now, the cool thing about Mother Maybelle Carter, part of the Carter family, she played country, and the famous thing that she played on the Elfala. Played with pick. That's called Wildwood Flower. That was a big hit for her. And an early song that people learned when I was a little kid. 7 or 8 young Irish girls showed me how to play that song. Anyway, other questions? Judy.
G.E., I wonder, is it possible for you to describe the experience of picking up a guitar and falling in love? Or one single one that you've had that this is...
Yes. And with Matt sitting here, it's very easy for me because more than a couple times, when I had no intention of buying a guitar, I'd go in a store. Matt ran a store. How many years did you have the store?
48.
48 years in the village. He ran the store. And it was not just a guitar store. It was really this communal. You'd go in there and you never knew who was going to be in there. I would stand at the counter and talk to Dave Van Ronk, or the James Iha, the guitar player from Smashing Pumpkins, or Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. I met all those guys in Matt's store.
Or William Westmoreland, I swear to God.
What did he get?
Not much. Katie Couric. I mean, it goes on.
Amazing. But yeah, so I'd walk into Matt's store just to hang out and you know, talk to Matt and Zeke and the other people that used to work there, and I'd see some guitar and it would just call my name, you know. I bought one guitar in there.
And it would be a visual thing?
First, it's a visual thing. First, you know, you see, like the Gibson J200, the big cowboy guitar, right? I walked in there one day, and there's a J200 hanging there, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, why? Something's wrong here. It's a 60s, but it's a 50s at the same time, and these parts I'm seeing. And it wasn't a whole bunch of money. It was $1,800 or something at the time. It was a long time ago. So I bought the guitar, and it turned out to be a really great instrument. You know, I had to have some work done on it, get frets and stuff, but it turned out to be this great. And that would so often happen. I'd go in there, and there would just be something about it. I have two of my favorite guitars now. One of them is upstairs, the 1954 Les Paul Jr. electric guitar. I saw on eBay. And I saw the picture. Now, they made about 200 million of those. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but they made a shitload of those guitars, you know. They're not hard to find. That one, I saw it on eBay, and I went, so, and I got it. You know, I just paid whatever the guy was asking. The guitar came from Missouri, and it's a fabulous guitar.
Sometimes...
You pick it up and you go, oh my God!
Sometimes it'll just hit you, and over all those years, you know, guitars would come in, or I'd find them somewhere and bring them in, and every so often I open a case, and one would go, oh no, and it hasn't happened to me in years. Of course, I don't have that clubhouse anymore with 500 guitars in it. That's been gone for 5 years, but astoundingly, twice in the past 6 months, it happened to me. I opened the case, somebody brought in a guitar, a very plain 1920s Martin, and I went, and it needed a little bit of attention for playability and all this, and I don't keep guitars, I don't have a collection, but I was so sorely tempted. It hit me. I opened the case, I fell in love. It just, boing, it has.
I think I can add to that a little bit. Another aspect is, for musicians, guitars are tools. They're like paintbrushes for a musician to paint musical pictures, ideas, expressions. And they'll reach for a different brush. And that's why I think a lot of guitar players have a gaggle of guitars, all different kinds. Some in standard tunings, some in open tunings, whatever. So really, the guitar will speak to that person creatively and inspirationally by the moment. The guitar is so easily and readily available, you can just reach for it. It's around you all the time. So that's one of the beauties of the instrument, is you can just pick it up at a moment's notice. And if it rings a bell to you, wow.
They are organic instruments, organic items. They're made of organic materials. They're wood. And sometimes, you know, just on the same wavelength. Something somebody said to me, it's got to be about 30 years ago. Of course, when I was a lot younger and I knew that I knew everything, to me, electric guitars, because I was all wrapped up in the acoustic and Martin thing and all this, 30, 40 years ago maybe, and electric guitars to me were like, well, who cares? It's, you know, it's got some electronic parts, and I know my electronic stuff too. And it's, you know, it's just a bunch of wires and stuff. And somebody said to me, don't think of them as electric guitars. Think of them as solid body acoustic guitars with pickups in them. Changed my outlook for the rest of my life on what these things are.
That's good.
You know who that was? Richie Fleegler.
Really?
Yeah.
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 That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
When I was 11, my mom because I had been offered a job playing with a band with some older people, I was going to be able to make some money. My mom took me shopping and for an electric guitar, and we lucked into a very good Fender Telecaster, which I still have. I've had it since 1963, long time. Okay, so over the years, I've had a lot of other guitars, and I'll fall in love with the guitar for a while. And then recently, through a bunch of stuff happened, a lot of my stuff's in storage, but I kept that Fender that my mom bought me for my 11th birthday out, and I've just been kind of using that exclusively lately. And it's part of me, you know? Maybe since I had it since I was 11, maybe because it's a really good guitar too. It's a really good one, but I've owned a lot of good guitars. Something about playing it, you know? You gotta play it. These things are meant to be played. They're tools. Like a lot of the vintage guitars have become so valuable that people will own them. Players, real players, you know, guys in bands that are out on the road, but they won't take it.
When people would come into my store sometimes, and in the latter years, my staff did a lot to keep me off the floor because I got a little, you know, I was speaking my mind. But there would be, if I would just be with some customer and they're insisting, no, I gotta have the one with the green stripe on the left side, or the one with, I gotta have the one with 3 screws, not 4 screws. And my reply was, what do you want to do with this thing? You want to play it or you want to wear it?
Questions? Right in the middle there.
This young lady next to me went into your store to buy an Ovation acoustic guitar, and your either one of your salesmen or yourself sold her a Gibson J185
Whoa.
that I still have, which is a phenomenal guitar. And it was just a guy in the store giving her, someone who didn't know anything about guitars, some really good advice.
Oh, well.
Because she came out with something very different that she came in for.
I'm so glad y'all are happy with that.
And I still have it, and I love it. But my question for you is, why is it that guitars sound better in the guitar store sometimes than they do at home?
Well, I'll tell you. Well, there are 2 reasons. In some guitar stores, one is when there's 500 guitars around there, there's going to be an imperceptible everything's vibrating. Okay, there's that. There's a lot of wood there, et cetera. It's like in a recording studio. You don't have hard walls. You have, you know, maybe rugs or whatever. You have wood paneling, et cetera. The other thing, we carpeted the walls for exactly that reason, so that sound would not be bouncing around. When I first moved into that particular location in 1982, one of the things, one of my customers was in the carpeting business, and all that stuff. And we carpeted those walls, and that helped. That, and rather than a hardwood floor, so go ahead, a hardwood floor. No, we got cheesy linoleum tile. There's a certain, you know, it's a little absorptive. So why do they sound better? There's that, and man, you walk into a place with 500 guitars, you are all jacked up. So that's part of it. You're looking for it.
Did you have a question in the back there? Yeah. Wait for the mic.
You mentioned that each wood that you ping, it has potential. You look for potential. You listen for the potential of the wood. Have you ever gotten to a point where, like, no, this one's not it?
Where it's not it? It
Yeah.
doesn't work. Oh, yeah, sure, of course. You know, I always made a personal policy of not allowing certain materials through my front door. And that would sort of help me just be at ease with the great majority of wood that I already have in the shop, because it was already pre-selected. You know, the building process of making an instrument, at least from the luthier's point of view, and these are one of the differences between my experience and, let's say, a factory type of situation, is I have the advantage that I can accept and reject every piece that goes together into the single object. Every piece is contingent upon the next piece, really a part of the whole. So that's I think the responsibility of what a luthier does is they learn how to read the materials that are right there in front of them and making decisions every step of the way. So yes, there's some woods that, yeah, not good enough, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, thank you guys so much. My question is, when you find yourself reaching for guitars either to noodle around at home comfortably or versus on stage or in the studio, what do you guys find yourselves reaching for the most in terms of guitars? Oh, for all three of you, yeah.
I play at home. I have, I know certain dealers, et cetera, who have amassed collections of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 guitars. I have 3. And that's fine with me. I have a Telecaster that the people at Fender, when there was no custom shop, it's a long story, but they made me a very special one. I have a D28 that I have a history with. Some amongst you, I'm willing to bet, are familiar with the New Lost City Ramblers of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, old-timey band, Mike Seeger, John Cohen, and Tracy Schwartz. And at any rate, John Cohen bought in 1963, he bought a 1939 D28 from my mentor, Mark Sober, who had a store called Fretted Instruments on 6th Avenue, right next to the Folklore Center in the 1960s. When I was 14, 15 years old, and just learning about this stuff, I went in there. Mark would point to something, not say anything, and I got it. At any rate, he had this 1963 guitar that John Cohen bought, and it was the Ramblers guitar. One reason or another, by 1967 or 68, I had already become the whiz kid guitar repair person in New York. If you had a truly precious instrument, and that's what I was doing, I didn't have a store, I was a repair guy. If you had something precious, needed serious work, I was the one to come to. And the bridge was coming off, it needed something else. So here's a group that when I was 13, 14, I worshiped. Well, John bought this guitar from someone who mentored me a little later in 1963. 1967, the guitar comes to me to repair. Comes the late 1980s. My mom had just passed away. I had a little money from the state, and John came to me and said, you know, I have to get my kitchen redone, and I just got divorced, and all the money from here went to there and went to there, so would you like to buy this guitar? Yes, I bought it. I have it. I have my one Martin guitar. I have that, and I have a 1952 Martin that came into the store in 1972. It was a 20-year-old guitar. Well, now it's a 70-year-old guitar. And that's it. What was the question? I forget. Oh, what do I play? I don't play a lot. In the store all those years, I would have one of those things in my hands for one reason or another for 5 minutes at a time, 40 times a day. So I never really sat around and played at home other than when I was learning to play as a teenager. But every so often I'll pick up John Cohen's D28 or my 0021. The Telecaster, well, I'm not good enough. So, but I'll fool around with it. And I have one banjo that came into the store in the 70s, and when nobody's looking, I'll play the banjo.
John, what do you play when you're home?
Okay. All of these guitars, except that one's not mine, but the rest of them, I make the rounds, and I do play them, all of these, and the mandolin. I'm primarily a piano player myself. That's my training. But my couch guitar is that flat top over there, lately, anyway. But yeah, I enjoy playing all of them. They're fun.
My favorite guitar to play when I'm home, I have it's a early 1933 Gibson L1 flat top, a small body.
Cool.
It's just a magical guitar. Now, John, as you see, also makes mandolins.
That sounds fabulous. That is a marvelous sounding mandolin. See, these two guys are the artists here. Oh, yeah, these are the artists. All I did was surround myself with hundreds of them, and because I like them.
You served a very important purpose and position down in the village there, Matt.
Well, thank you. It was a clubhouse. Yeah.
That was an interesting time, for an era, for the attention that has been given to the vintage guitar market, which was, it grew up with us.
Yeah, we were of that, what's that, the baby boomer thing, basically.
They used to just be used guitars. Old guitars, they were called. Used guitars. At some point, no slight to Matt, but at some point the dealers took over, and it became the vintage guitar industry.
I always hated that word.
I actually heard somebody say, I'm in the airport at the security line one day at the airport, and I was actually going to the NAMM show, the big musical instrument trade show. I'm flying out to California, and there's these people in line behind me, and they're talking about, well, since we've been in the industry, and I'm thinking, oh, what industry? And then I realized they're going to the NAMM show too. Yeah. The vintage guitar industry. Give me a break.
I always hated that word vintage, and in fact, when we first put together a website for my store, which was early website days, I guess 20 years ago or more, when we laid out categories for all the guitars, because we were dealers also for, Martin, Fender, Gibson, Taylor, all that, and then we had all the other stuff. We had two categories, new stuff and old stuff. The word vintage never appeared on my website.
The reason that I played the song that I played on the mandolin, now this is me being really pissy, so I apologize in front, but we're friends now, right? I believe that there's a bluegrass tyranny has grown up around the mandolin. And if you don't have a Lore F5, and if you can't play like Bill Monroe, forget it. You're not a mandolin player. Well, I've owned Lore F5s, and I was happy to sell them. Let me tell you, because they were worth 20 times more than I paid 3 years ago, always. That's not the sound I really get off on a mandolin. I kind of like the old-timey sound of a mandolin. I enjoy that more, and I enjoy playing different kinds of music, like that little Caribbean carnival thing.
This sounds more from over there on the side. I'm knocked out. I'm knocked out by the sound of that.
And you made this one in the 70s, you said, right? 1977 he made this, before he knew what he was doing. Any more questions? Yes, sir. Wilson. This is my friend Wilson.
Hey, G. It seems like the guitar is possibly the most successful instrument type in the world, the most commonly used,
The
at least
most
from what I
popular
can
instrument in the history of the world, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Why not the banjo? Why not the mandolin? Why not 7 strings? Why do you think we centered on something like this?
You can play bass and melody at the same time. Now you can do that on a mandolin, but not as much, and you got to really practice for a long time. You can learn to play the guitar. The simple thing, I think in 6 weeks you can be pretty good, and you can go serenade somebody. You can learn the basic 3 chords that you need to know to play all the songs. There's only 12 notes in Western music. How wrong can you go? Somebody said that to me about 25, 30 years ago, and it just freed me up as a musician. I used to get nervous. Once I realized that there's only 12 notes. How bad can it get? Right?
Well, there's also the theory that says they ain't no money past the 5th fret.
Yeah, there is that. Past the 3rd fret for a lot of people. I think that the guitar, it's some people call it a movable piano. You can play a lot of music on it fairly easily. If you put a little time into it, you can learn to play a lot of music on it without too much stress.
It's user-friendly.
User-friendly, absolutely. Anybody else? Yes. Do they sound better if you play them more? Absolutely. Even This afternoon, when John got here and we brought his instruments in, this was cold. It had been in the car. And I first played it, and I kind of went, ooh, interesting. And then later, after it had sat in here and it had warmed up a little, and John went to get something to eat, I took it in the back and I tuned it up and I sat there and played it for about a half an hour. And it really started to open up, and it really started getting friendly.
People would ask us about this all the time. Well, do the older guitars sound better? Well, they will sound pretty darn good if they've been played a lot. And the simple analogy that we use so people can understand, if you buy a brand new leather belt, it is stiff. You wear it, you put it in your jeans, after a while, it's going to get pretty darn supple. And a similar thing happens with the wood. The more it vibrates, the looser it becomes. The more the instrument is played, the more it is able to do what it already does better.
If you
Vibration.
find like upstairs, I have a couple of my electric guitars that are worn. I mean, like worn, but they're not abused. They weren't thrown around. They were played and played and played and played. You find that means it was a good one to begin with. A lot of times, unless something really interesting happened, if you find like this mint perfect guitar, like a Fender guitar from 1954, and it's mint perfect, it's because it wasn't fun to play. Guy didn't want to play it, you know. Anybody else? All right, you're free to go.